So the news cycle has been chock full of events lately, and you might have missed a couple of rather significant events up here in Canada. Sadly, a couple of weeks ago there was a mass shooting in Nova Scotia, which was just an awful thing. It's not something that happens often in Canada, and it was really devastating. And in the wake of that tragedy, our federal government has announced sweeping new gun control regulations that essentially take something like 1,500 guns and make them illegal in Canada. And these are what are considered assault style weapons. People who own these guns, they may have bought them legally, but they're now illegal. People that purchase guns that may have been legal at the time of purchase, a lot of them are illegal now. So they'll have the option to participate in a government buyback program over the next 2 years to get these guns out of circulation. Now, I'm not here to rant about gun control. What I am here to propose is an alternative to gun ownership, and that is camera ownership. Did you know you can dress up in camo gear, you can hike out into the wilderness with a camera in your backpack, you can camp, you can set up a blind, you can spot that perfect 10-point buck that you've been eyeing your whole life. And instead of pulling the trigger on a gun, you push the shutter button of a camera and you get an image of that beautiful animal as opposed to the actual animal itself. I know it sounds crazy, but it's actually really great. I'm also not here to debate hunting for meat. If you hunt to feed your family, fill your boots. I have no issue with that whatsoever. I'm not anti-gun, I'm not anti-hunting. I am anti-trophy hunting. Like if you're going hunting just to bring home some antlers or a carcass to have in your house, I don't really see the difference in taking a camera and capturing an image of that same animal and displaying that in your house, because you're still the one that did the work. You tracked the animal, you got the image, you brought it home, you framed it, you put it up. Kind of the same thing to me. Guns are expensive, and cameras are also expensive. So if you're going to participate in this government buyback program here in Canada, I'm going to give you some ways to spend your money that are a little bit more budget friendly. Well, two of them are budget friendly. One of them slightly less budget friendly, but I've tried to keep it as budget friendly as I could. So let's talk about 3 budget setups that will get you out into nature, capturing images of whatever animal tickles your fancy. So setup number 1. The Sony A390 with a Minolta AF 70-210 f4 beer can lens. So the A390 is a 14.2 megapixel digital SLR camera that was released in 2010. It has a CCD sensor, 14.2 megapixels. It's got pretty good autofocus. It doesn't take video at all. It's a fairly rough and tumble body. I think it would probably take a fair good knock and still be okay. It's not weather sealed, but you know, it's pretty cheap. And then bolted to this thing, I have the legendary Minolta AF 70-210 f4 beer can lens. So it's a constant f4 internal zoom 70-210. This was from the original Minolta AF mount, which is the same mount that Sony DSLRs still use. So you can pop this lens on the A390 and it will fully autofocus and communicate with the camera. And it's still sharp where it needs to be. It's fast enough at f4 that gives you beautiful separation of your subject from the background. And with this being an APS-C camera, it gives you a 35mm equivalent focal length of 105 to 315 millimeters. So still very good reach and just an excellent budget package for wildlife shooting. You can get different Sony bodies, and Minolta did offer a few different zoom lenses roughly the same as this one, but this one's my favorite, and this body is cheap but still high enough resolution. The raw files are great, the autofocus is pretty good, so it's a good choice. Total cost for this setup is under $300 US, probably closer to $250 or less, depending on how hard you want to look for bargains, but just an amazing little setup for wildlife shooting, and something that if you get out in the field and you break it, you know, it's not that big a deal. So setup number 2. This is sort of my rugged outdoor wildlife shooting setup where the A390 and that Minolta lens lack any sort of weather sealing. This setup is fully weather sealed, body and lens. It is a Fuji X-T1 with the XF 100-400. So this is the longest lens that Fuji makes, and this is sort of the least budget friendly of the 3 setups that I'm showing you today, just basically based on this lens. This is about a $2,000 lens, taxes included, but if you're replacing an expensive semi-automatic rifle, you know, they can start pushing that kind of money too once you deck them out with all the accoutrements that you can get down at Cabela's. The camera, the X-T1, is 3 generations behind the current X-T4, but it's still a great camera. It has the 16 megapixel X-Trans sensor. It's an APS-C sensor. It has really fast autofocus for photos, and it's got all Fujifilm's built-in film simulations. It shoots nice raw images. The JPEGs that come into this camera are also great. And then when you pair it with this XF 100-400, you're getting an equivalent focal length in 35mm terms of 150 to 600 millimeters. So this thing has just a ton of reach, and it's a great setup. I have it on this Miike battery grip, so this adds an extra battery. So you've got 2 batteries running the camera. It'll last twice as long. Nice fully weather sealed setup, nice and rugged, a little pricier than the Sony for sure. Total cost for this setup is around 2,400 USD with a decent used X-T1 body and the battery grip. The lens is really where most of that money's going, but the X-T1's got a bit more chunk to it than some of the other X-series cameras. The XT single digit cameras all are a slightly bigger camera. The XH1 would be a great choice for this too, but then that increases your budget quite a bit more. So yeah, this is the higher end budget setup, but still a really great setup for wildlife photography. Setup number 3. Now this is my personal favorite. It's the Fujifilm X-T20 with the XC50-230 telephoto lens. This thing is pretty funny when it zooms. It's just like a big air pump. The XC50-230, for anybody who's watched this channel before, you've probably heard me talk about it. It's one of my favorite lenses. It's plastic. It looks cheap. It is cheap. It's a very affordable lens. It's got a very slow aperture at the wide end of 4.5 to 6.7. But it's sharp enough, and it gives you great reach. The focal length is 35mm equivalent focal length is 75 to 345, I think. Yeah, 75 to 345 millimeters, and it has OIS, which is great. The 100-400 also has OIS. I don't think I mentioned that, which is very, very good. This is not as good, but it'll give you a couple of stops of stabilization for slower shutter speeds. Now paired with the X-T20, which is a couple generations ago, it's actually a very fast setup. The autofocus is very snappy with this setup, and I still love the X-T20. It's one of my favorite cameras that Fujifilm has made in the entire X series lineup. I think that it still holds its own with the latest offerings in terms of autofocus. It's got that 24 megapixel X-Trans sensor. It's got a good processor inside, and it is still the traditional layout on the back, so it still has a D-pad, which I enjoy, as opposed to the joystick, and it doesn't have that annoying Q button like the X-T30. This lens gets overlooked quite a bit by more serious shooters, and I don't think it should, because it's very compact, very good for travel, and it's the second longest lens in the Fujifilm lineup, and I think that smaller maximum aperture number scares a lot of people away, but I think if you give it a chance, it'll surprise you for sure. So total cost for setup number 3 is around 700 USD. You might be able to get a little bit lower than that if you hunt around eBay for some good used bargains. There also is a silver version of this lens that is cheaper than the black one by a couple bucks. People hate silver lenses, and I can't say I blame them. They're kind of ugly, but if you don't mind the look of the silver lens on your camera, or if you have the silver X-T20, it'll match that and will look totally normal. And it costs a little bit less money because nobody wants them. So there you have it. Get rid of your guns, get some cameras. They're both finely engineered precision instruments made to go out into nature and give you an experience and all that stuff. It's just that, you know, one of them you end up having to drag a carcass home with you, and the other one you just have to download some pictures off of a memory card, which sounds a lot cleaner to me and easier, and I don't have to buy bullets for my camera, which is great. Now, I think overall, shooting guns and shooting with cameras are sort of equally frustrating and rewarding depending on what you're doing them for. It's just that one of them is a lot more legal in Canada these days than it was a couple of days ago. So yeah, it's just my little way of trying to give all you gun folks out there another alternative to shooting. And you never know, maybe you're gonna love it, maybe you hate it, but it's worth a shot. And I know my comments are gonna be insane on this video, and I can't wait. All right, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.